I was scrubbing plates in the small, noisy kitchen of the Blue Willow, a diner tucked into a quiet street in downtown Chicago. Steam hissed from the dishwashing machine, and the smell of fried bacon mixed with lemon-scented soap. I didn't mind the hard work. At 35, I had learned that life wasn't always gentle, but sometimes when my arms ached and my back hurt, I wondered if things would ever change for me. That day, like most days, I was lost in my thoughts, scrubbing a stack of greasy plates and wondering if my life would ever have a break. My mother, Susan, and my younger brother, Jason, had never supported me. They kept me poor, always telling me I was too soft or not smart enough to make something of myself. I had learned to survive quietly, working long hours and keeping my dreams to myself. Then it happened. A man walked in near the lunch rush, tall and dressed in a crisp suit, looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine. He didn't order much, a coffee and a sandwich, but when he left, he dropped a tip on the counter that made me freeze. $600. My hands shook as I stared at the stack of bills. Then he smiled at me and asked my name. "Samantha," I said, barely able to speak. He nodded and walked out, leaving me blinking at the cash, my mind spinning. Weeks later, my lawyer called me. I had barely believed it when he told me there was a hidden fortune in my name, a trust set up by a relative I had never even met. My heart raced as I thought about it. For years, my mother and brother had kept me living paycheck to paycheck. And now, suddenly, my life could change forever. Then the calls started. My mother's voice, sharp and demanding, filled the line. "Samantha, we know about the money. We want our share." Jason's voice chimed in, greedy and unashamed. I smiled quietly. I could hear the desperation behind their words. But I didn't panic. I had a plan and my lawyer was ready. I just had to prepare the real papers. It was a strange feeling, holding power over the people who had once held power over me. I felt a mix of fear, excitement, and satisfaction. But as I hung up the phone, a strange thought hit me. What if they tried to manipulate me? What if they came in person, demanding, shouting? Had to be ready. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Samantha Hayes. I am 35 years old. I live in Chicago, and I have spent most of my life working hard to make ends meet, while my family lived in luxury on the little inheritance my grandmother left them. I never complained because I believed that kindness and patience mattered more than money. Even when Jason teased me or Mom criticized me, I stayed calm. I learned empathy early, because I knew that bitterness would only eat me alive. I remember one night in particular years ago when I was 18. I had saved every penny from a summer job at a local bakery. Mom wanted me to give her some of it. "You'll never get anywhere in life without family," she said, her voice sharp. I smiled and said nothing. That night, I understood a hard truth. Kindness and generosity might not always be rewarded, but cruelty and greed would never break me. I spent my 20s working odd jobs, dishwasher, barista, office assistant, always dreaming of a life where I could finally be free. I didn't chase luxury. I chased stability. I helped strangers when I could, even giving free meals to homeless people near the diner. I believed that small acts of empathy mattered. And now, here I was, on the verge of a life-changing moment, all because of a stranger who had walked in and tipped me $600. It seemed like fate had finally decided to smile on me. The twist of fate that had seemed so impossible was unfolding before my eyes. But the thought of my mother and brother storming into my life, demanding a cut of my hidden fortune, filled me with both anxiety and anticipation. So I started preparing. I called my lawyer, told him to get the documents ready. I even planned a few surprises for Mom and Jason. But the best part was knowing that for the first time in my life I held the cards. I often wonder where you are watching this story from. Are you in Toronto, New York, Chicago? Maybe a small town in California. Wherever you are, imagine the scene. A tiny diner kitchen, a woman scrubbing plates, and a stranger who changed everything with a simple question. "What's your name?" And now, the moment that would turn my life upside down had arrived. I was scrubbing the plates, lost in thought, when the diner door opened again and I saw him, the man who tipped me $600, walking in carrying something that looked suspiciously like a briefcase. My heart raced. I didn't know whether he was here to return the money, to explain himself, or something else entirely. And that's when it happened. The diner went silent. The plates in my hands felt heavier than ever. He stopped in front of me, looked me in the eye, and said words I will never forget. But I can't tell you yet. Not now. Because that moment was just the beginning. Little did I know, that single interaction would lead to my mother and brother flying in, demanding their share of a fortune they had no idea I even controlled. It would test my patience, my cunning, and my sense of justice. But I had learned to be patient, and to let life unfold. And now, I was ready for the extreme turn of events about to hit me. Because in the next few days, my life would change in ways I had never imagined. And the $600 tip was only the very first ripple. The man with the briefcase stood there, right in front of me, and my heart practically jumped out of my chest. He didn't speak for a few seconds, just looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like he could see every secret I'd ever held. Then finally he said, "Samantha Hayes, I need to speak with you about a matter of great importance." His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. I glanced around. The diner was packed with the lunchtime crowd, yet somehow it felt like we were in our own quiet world. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my trembling hands. Okay, I managed to say. He handed me a card, black with gold lettering. Edward Klein, attorney at law. My stomach twisted. I had never met this man before, yet somehow he seemed to know everything. "Please come with me," he said, motioning toward the small office at the back of the diner. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, but I nodded. As I walked behind him, the plates I had been scrubbing just minutes before seemed like a lifetime ago. Inside the office, he closed the door gently and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of papers neatly organized and laid them on the desk in front of me. My eyes widened as I read the heading, "The Samantha Hayes Trust Fund, Confidential. You have a hidden fortune," he explained, "established decades ago by your late grandmother, Margaret Hayes. It was set up to remain hidden until the beneficiary reached a certain age, and until now, it remained undiscovered. You are the sole owner. No one else has a legal claim, unless you choose to share it." My hands shook as I scanned the documents. Millions of dollars. Investments. Properties. Everything I had ever dreamed of, now suddenly within my grasp. I couldn't believe it. After years of scrubbing dishes, working odd jobs, and watching my mother and brother live comfortably while I struggled, I finally had a chance to be free. And then the next wave of shock hit me. The papers listed my mother and brother as potential beneficiaries, but only if I agreed. Otherwise they had no claim. I felt a rush of vindication. For so long they had treated me like I was nothing. Now I held power I had never had before. I tried to calm myself, but my mind raced. I thought about all the years I had spent quiet, kind, and patient. The moments I had given strangers food, money, or encouragement. The late nights scrubbing dishes, hoping for something better. All of it had led to this moment. And yet, I knew I had to be careful. Edward leaned back in his chair. "You need to decide carefully, Samantha. They may come for you. Your mother and brother are resourceful, and once they know about this, they won't stop until they have something." I nodded, even though I felt a mix of fear and excitement bubbling inside me. I thanked him, took the papers, and returned to the diner floor. My hands were steadier now, but my heart pounded as I thought about what would come next. For the next few days, I continued my routine at the diner. The customers didn't notice the difference in me, but I felt like a different person. Every plate I scrubbed, every table I wiped down, reminded me of how far I had come. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about Mom and Jason. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found out. Then came the call. The one I had been expecting. "Samantha, it's your mother. Fly me and Jason out there. We know what you have and we're coming for our share," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. Jason chimed in, greedy and confident, saying he expected me to do the right thing. I smiled quietly to myself. They had no idea that I had already spoken to my lawyer. They had no idea that the papers I had would give me complete control over the trust. I felt a thrill of anticipation. Finally, the tables had turned. The next day they arrived. Mom in her designer coat, Jason carrying a fancy leather bag, both looking every bit like the people who had once looked down on me. They stepped into the diner, and I could feel the tension in the air. Every patron seemed to fade into the background as I met their gaze. "Mom, Jason," I said calmly, "I'm so glad you could make it." They smirked, confident, assuming that fear or obligation would make me give in. But I had learned to wait, to plan, and to remain kind even in the face of greed. I led them to a table, offering water and coffee, while inside, I was quietly preparing the next move. And then it happened. Jason reached for my handbag, trying to intimidate me. "We're not leaving without something," he said, his voice loud enough to draw glances from other diners. I froze for a moment, but only briefly. Then I smiled, and in that instant, I knew the game had officially begun. The extreme event that would test every ounce of patience, intelligence, and courage I had built over 35 years was unfolding right before me. And I didn't flinch. 'Cause I had a plan. And it was about to turn the entire story on its head. Jason's hand hovered over my handbag, his smirk wide and full of confidence. "Come on, Samantha. You know we deserve a piece of what's yours. Don't make this difficult," he said, leaning forward. The diner went quiet, the background chatter fading as if everyone sensed the tension in the air. I felt a calm wash over me. For years, my mother and brother had tried to control me, to belittle me, to make me doubt myself. But now I had the upper hand. I didn't raise my voice or show fear. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, smiling politely, and said, "Jason, you'll have to wait your turn." His eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers, the real trust documents prepared by my lawyer. I slid them across the table like a magician revealing the final trick. "These," I said calmly, "are the official papers. Everything you think you know, everything you've demanded, is under my control. And I've already instructed my lawyer to make sure that no one touches a penny without my approval." For a moment, Mom's mouth fell open. Jason's confident smirk faltered. I could almost feel the power shifting in the air. The smug expressions that had been on their faces for years were cracking, replaced by something else: panic. But they didn't give up easily. Mom leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Samantha, don't play games with us. You owe us. You know what's right. You can't just keep it all." I smiled even more, calmly sipping my water. "I know what's right. And I also know that kindness doesn't mean giving up everything to people who never cared about me." Jason's jaw tightened. Mom's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and desperation. And then, suddenly, she slammed her hand onto the table. The sound made everyone jump, the cutlery clattering loudly. "We will not leave without our share, Samantha." And that's when the extreme event escalated. Jason reached into his bag and pulled out something unexpected: a thick envelope. He slammed it on the table in front of me. "Here's a little incentive," he said, his voice sneering, "to make you hand over the rest." I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what was inside, but instinct told me it was another ploy, a way to scare or manipulate me. I looked at him calmly, keeping my face steady. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I don't make decisions based on threats." For the next hour, the tension in the diner was electric. They argued, pleaded, and tried to manipulate me with words, tone, and even subtle threats. But I remained calm, steady, and patient. I remembered all those years scrubbing dishes, helping strangers, working hard without recognition. I reminded myself that empathy didn't mean letting people take advantage of me. Finally, they left the diner, fuming, muttering under their breath about lawyers, courts, and what they would do next. I sat back, feeling exhausted but victorious. For the first time in my life, I realized that patience, kindness, and planning could be more powerful than anger, greed, or intimidation. The next few days were quieter, almost peaceful. I returned to the diner, washing plates, chatting with regular customers, and feeling a strange sense of freedom. I allowed myself little joys: a walk in the park, a coffee by the lake, even treating a homeless man to lunch. I felt lighter, as if the burden of years of poverty and manipulation had lifted. But the calm was deceptive. A storm was coming, one I hadn't yet seen clearly. Because in the back of my mind, I knew my mother and brother wouldn't stop. And then, just when I thought the worst was over, my lawyer called with urgent news. "Samantha," Edward's voice was tense. "There's been a development. Someone has tried to access the trust illegally. They've filed documents in court. And it looks like they're trying to challenge your ownership." My heart pounded. The extreme event hit again, but this time it wasn't in front of me. It was a shadow moving behind the scenes. I realized that the battle had only just begun. My mother and brother weren't the only ones interested in my fortune. And in that instant, I understood something very important. Kindness and patience were my greatest weapons, but I would need courage, cleverness, and a little daring to protect what was mine. I looked out the diner window at the Chicago skyline, the sun dipping behind the buildings. A chill of excitement ran through me. The fight was coming, but I was ready. The next chapter of my life was about to explode, and I was no longer the girl scrubbing plates, ignored by her family. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. It was Edward, my lawyer, and the urgency in his voice made my stomach knot. "Samantha, they've filed formal papers in court," he said immediately. "Your mother and brother are working with someone. We don't know who yet, but they're challenging the trust. They want to gain access to your fortune." I froze for a moment, letting the news sink in. The calm I had felt in the diner over the past few days evaporated instantly. My heart raced. This wasn't just about Jason slamming a bag on a table or Mom shouting. This was legal, powerful, and it was designed to shake me to my core. "Do we know who's behind this?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "Not yet, but I have a team working on it. I suggest you stay low for now. Don't confront them directly. Let me handle this." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear because I knew my mother and brother could be relentless, and exhilaration because, for the first time in my life, I had real power and the means to protect it. That day, I returned to the diner, doing my usual work of washing plates, stacking cups, and keeping the small kitchen running smoothly. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside, I was already preparing my next moves. I reviewed the trust documents again, memorizing every clause, every line, every loophole. I wanted to be ready for anything. By lunchtime, a small sense of normalcy had returned. I helped a young mother with her baby's spilled juice, joked with regulars, and even made a sandwich for an elderly man who looked like he hadn't eaten all day. These small acts reminded me why I had survived so long. Kindness and patience had been my tools for years, and now they gave me strength. But the peace didn't last long. That evening, a private investigator Edward had hired called. "Samantha," he said in a low voice, "I've traced some unusual activity. Someone's been tracking your movements. They may know where you live and where you work. Be careful." My pulse quickened. The extreme event was escalating. My mother and brother were not just fighting through the courts, they were actively trying to intimidate me. But I refused to panic. I had learned long ago that fear could be a tool for others. I wasn't about to give them that power. I spent the night planning. I listed out every possible move they could make, every tactic they could use, and how I could counter it. I called Edward repeatedly, going over the trust documents, ensuring that every possible protection was in place. I even arranged for extra security at the diner, though I didn't tell anyone except Edward. The next morning, I arrived at the diner and found a package sitting on the counter. No name, no return address. My heart sank as I opened it. Inside was a single, thick envelope filled with photocopied pages, all stamped with official-looking seals and signatures. It was a legal document, claiming to revoke parts of the trust and granting temporary access to my mother and brother. I felt my chest tighten. They were escalating. They were trying to scare me, push me into submission. But I smiled instead. I called Edward immediately. "They're bluffing," I said calmly. "They can't access anything without my signature." Edward agreed, but his voice held concern. "Be careful, Samantha. This is bigger than you think. They're not stopping here." I hung up and looked out the diner window. Chicago glimmered in the morning sun, but for me, the city felt like a battlefield. My mother and brother were determined, but I had patience, cleverness, and control. I had the real papers in my hands, and I intended to use them wisely. And then the extreme event hit again. That afternoon, while I was serving lunch, a car pulled up in front of the diner. I couldn't see clearly, but there were at least 3 people stepping out, moving fast. My heart raced. Something told me they weren't just stopping by for a coffee. I didn't know what they wanted yet, but I knew that the real confrontation, the one that could change everything, was about to happen. The calm I had felt for a few days had shattered, replaced by tension so thick it could almost be touched. And at that moment I realized something crucial. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting. I was in control. I had plans, documents, and the patience to outsmart anyone who tried to challenge me. But the question remained, would it be enough? Because when they walked into the diner, I could see clearly now. It wasn't just Mom and Jason. There were other faces I didn't recognize. People who looked like they belonged in courtrooms, not cafes. And one of them was holding a camera, snapping pictures, documenting everything. I took a deep breath, straightened my apron, and walked toward them. The extreme event had arrived, and the real battle was about to begin. The 3 strangers stepped into the diner, their expressions sharp, eyes scanning the room as though they were hunting something. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew fear could give them power, and I refused to hand it to them. One of them, a tall man in a black suit, approached the counter. "Samantha Hayes?" he asked, his voice clipped professional. He nodded. "We have reason to believe you are withholding access to funds to which your family has legal rights," he said. His words were polite, but there was an unmistakable edge of threat beneath them. He glanced at Mom and Jason, who were sitting a few tables away, their faces a mix of triumph and tension. I clenched my hands around a coffee pot, pretending to pour while listening. "I'm not withholding anything illegal," I said calmly. "All legal actions regarding my inheritance are being handled by my lawyer." The man's eyes narrowed. "We're authorized to investigate. Any resistance could have consequences." I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of years of hardship and patience. "I have nothing to hide," I said. "But threats and intimidation won't change the law." Mom's face flushed red, and Jason leaned forward eagerly. "See, Samantha. Even the lawyers are on our side," Jason said, his voice dripping with smugness. I ignored them. My focus was on the strangers, on their intentions, and on staying in control. Years of being underestimated had taught me that confidence and patience were as strong as any weapon. The strangers stayed for nearly an hour, taking notes, asking questions, snapping photos of the diner, and recording conversations. The extreme event escalated with every passing minute. I served them coffee and sandwiches, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I smiled politely, cracked a few jokes, and even asked about their day to appear casual. They were professional, but my composure unsettled them. Finally they left, but the tension didn't leave with them. My stomach churned as I realized that this was only the beginning. Mom and Jason whispered urgently to each other, plotting their next move. But I had learned a vital lesson. Patience, cleverness, and empathy were my allies. The next few days passed with a deceptive calm. I returned to my routine at the diner, washing dishes, helping customers, and even giving a free meal to a homeless man who had recently started frequenting the corner near the diner. These small acts grounded me, reminded me of my values, and gave me clarity. The extreme events outside felt distant for a while, like waves lapping at the shore. Dangerous but manageable. Then came another subtle shock. Edward called with a grim tone. Samantha, I've reviewed the documents your mother and brother filed. They've added a new clause, claiming a loophole in the trust. They're asking for an emergency court hearing next week. I sighed but smiled inwardly. The less extreme moment of the past few days had given me time to prepare. Now I had to shift into full strategy mode. I organized all my papers, checked and double-checked legal forms, and even met with Edward to discuss contingencies. Every step, every plan was designed to keep me in control. But just when I thought I had a grasp on the situation, the next extreme event struck. One evening, while I was leaving the diner, I noticed headlights flashing rapidly in the street. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of me. The doors swung open, and two men jumped out, moving fast. Before I could react, one of them grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the vehicle. I struggled, but the grip was firm. Fear surged through me, but I remembered all the lessons I had learned: patience, courage, and strategic thinking. I didn't panic. Instead, I scanned the surroundings, looking for help, for any opportunity. The SUV door slammed shut, and the engine roared to life. I realized I was being taken somewhere against my will. My heart pounded, but a part of me was excited, because I knew this was the moment where my cleverness and planning would be tested to the limit. And in that instant, as the city lights blurred past the window, I understood something crucial. The battle for my fortune wasn't just legal. It had become personal, and it would test everything I had endured. The SUV turned down a dark street, and I knew the next few hours would determine the course of my life. The extreme event had arrived again, bigger than anything before, and I had no choice but to face it head-on. The SUV bounced along dark streets, and I pressed my back against the leather seat, trying to stay calm. My heart was racing, but I knew panic would only make things worse. I had survived difficult days, manipulative family members, and countless hardships, and I was about to prove that even when danger seemed close, cleverness and patience could carry me through. The two men didn't speak much, only glancing at me from time to time, their faces serious and unreadable. I observed them carefully, noting the seat belts, the small compartments, the keys in the ignition. I studied their body language, their tendencies, and I tried to imagine where they might be taking me. After several minutes of tense silence, the SUV slowed, stopping in front of a massive, unmarked building. One of the men got out first, signaling me to follow. My stomach twisted, but I forced my legs to move, stepping carefully, measuring each action. Inside, the building was stark and intimidating. Tall ceilings, polished floors, and the faint hum of air conditioning created an unsettling atmosphere. I was led into a small office where Mom and Jason were waiting, their expressions a mix of triumph and worry. "Finally," Mom said, her voice sharp. "Now we can discuss what's fair." Jason smirked. "We've been patient, Samantha, but patience only goes so far." I smiled calmly, trying to radiate confidence I didn't entirely feel. "You've been demanding for years, Mom, Jason. And I've been patient. I've listened, I've stayed kind, and I've made careful decisions. Now it's time for the truth." I reached into my bag and pulled out the real trust documents, sliding them across the desk with a gentle, deliberate motion. "These papers," I said, "give me full control. No one can claim anything without my consent. Not threats, not intimidation, not even lawsuits." Their faces flickered between anger and disbelief. Mom's hands shook slightly as she reached for the documents, then stopped. Jason's smirk faltered. For the first time I saw hesitation. The power dynamic had shifted, and they knew it. For the next hour I calmly explained everything. The hidden clauses, the legal protections, the careful planning I had done. I spoke with patience and clarity, refusing to let their anger provoke me. I reminded them of all the times I had endured, all the moments I had given them kindness while they took for granted. My words were measured but firm, and slowly, the tension in the room shifted. Eventually they left the office, but not in defeat. They left plotting, muttering under their breath about lawyers and courts and what they would do next. I exhaled, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. For a brief moment the extreme pressure had eased. Back at the diner, life returned to a quieter rhythm. I served customers, washed dishes, and allowed myself small joys. A hot coffee by the lake, a walk in the park, helping an elderly neighbor with groceries. These less extreme moments reminded me why I had endured so long. Kindness and empathy were not weaknesses. They were strengths. But the calm didn't last long. That evening, as I closed the diner, Edward called with urgent news. "Samantha," he said, "there's been a sudden twist. Someone has forged documents claiming partial ownership of the trust. It looks like Mom and Jason have hired someone else to challenge you legally. We need to act fast." My stomach tightened. The extreme event was returning, bigger than before. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was a coordinated attempt to strip me of what I had rightfully earned. I took a deep breath and smiled faintly. I had been ready for this moment. I called Edward back immediately, giving him instructions and preparing for the final showdown. And as I looked out the diner window at the Chicago skyline, the sun setting behind the tall buildings, I knew the ultimate test was coming. The final chapter, where every act of patience, cleverness, and courage I had cultivated over decades would be tested to the extreme, was just ahead. The storm was here, and I was ready. The morning of the court hearing arrived, gray and cold, with a mist that seemed to hang over the city. I walked into the courthouse wearing a simple, elegant dress, my hair neatly tied back, my hands steady. I felt the weight of years of struggle, patience, and kindness on my shoulders, and for the first time I carried it like armor. Mom and Jason were already there, sitting with their new legal team, whispering and glancing at me as though trying to intimidate me. But I didn't flinch. I met their eyes calmly, a faint smile on my lips. I had prepared for this day for weeks. Every document, every clause, every strategy one had discussed with Edward was ready. I wasn't just defending myself, I was taking control. The hearing began. The opposing counsel presented their arguments, claiming partial ownership, alleging that Mom and Jason had been unfairly denied access. Their tone was confident, their faces full of bravado. But I remained calm, patient, and focused. I knew that truth, clarity, and preparedness were stronger than theatrics and anger. When Edward presented the real trust documents, along with evidence of forged papers and attempted intimidation, the room went quiet. The judge read each page carefully, then looked at me. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "it appears you have acted in full accordance with the terms of the trust. Your family members have no legal claim beyond what you choose to grant." Relief washed over me, but I didn't celebrate just yet. Mom's face twisted with anger. Jason's jaw tightened, and I could see them plotting their next move. But Edward had anticipated everything. He presented the final piece of evidence, a notarized letter showing that any attempts to manipulate the trust or forge documents would lead to criminal charges. The judge nodded, stamped the documents, and officially confirmed my sole ownership of the trust. I felt a rush of triumph I had never experienced before. Years of patience, kindness, and careful planning had brought me here. I was free. I was powerful. I was finally in control of my own life. Mom and Jason glared at me as we left the courtroom. I smiled quietly, knowing that their threats and manipulation no longer held power over me. "It's over," I said softly to myself. "I win, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, courage, and clarity." Back at the diner, I returned to my routine, but everything felt different. The plates I scrubbed, the coffee I poured, and the meals I served now carried a new sense of freedom. I had survived cruelty and manipulation, and I had done it with empathy intact. I realized that kindness and patience weren't weaknesses. They were strengths that had allowed me to endure, to plan, and to triumph. I took a moment that evening to reflect. Sitting by the lake, sipping a warm cup of tea, I smiled as the sun dipped behind the city skyline. The world felt full of possibilities. I had faced extreme events, family betrayal, threats, intimidation, even abduction, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. And then I did something I had always wanted to do. I used my newfound freedom to help others. I set up scholarships for young women like me, worked with charities to support struggling families, and ensured that kindness, patience, and empathy could ripple outward from my life into the lives of others. Mom and Jason tried one last time to reach me, pleading and threatening, but I smiled and referred them to Edward. I had learned that control wasn't about revenge. It was about holding your power responsibly. And I did. One day, as I closed the diner, a man walked in. He smiled, handed me a $600 tip, and asked my name. I laughed softly to myself. Life had come full circle. That single act of kindness years ago had sparked the beginning of my transformation. And now I had the strength and wisdom to use my fortune, my power, and my experiences to make a difference. I walked out into the evening air, feeling the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. I was free. I was in control. And the future, bright and limitless, was entirely mine. The hidden fortune had changed my life, but my courage, kindness, and empathy had defined it.